Please go to finneganswakeNotes.net for a full explanation of the text, and please don't forget to hit the like button.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Ulysses Unlocked podcast, where we analyze Ulysses by James Joyce one page at a time. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. And welcome, everyone, to the deep dive. This session, custom tailored for you, we're plunging into just one single but incredibly dense page from James Joyce's Ulysses, specifically page 7. We're aiming to go beyond, the surface level here, uncovering some really insightful takeaways about the tension, the philosophy, the raw human emotion packed into this section. It really sets the stage for one of the most significant confrontations between Stephen Dedalus and Buck Mulligan. So we'll be exploring everything: symbolic gardeners, ancient Greek concepts, and that sharp, sometimes brutal clash of personal philosophies that really defines their relationship early on.
Indeed. And it's amazing how this one page, even just a few lines, reveals so much about their inner worlds, their contrasting views on life, death, perception. It's all there. It's a real masterclass in how Joyce layers meaning. He uses these seemingly small interactions to expose these vast ideological differences. So our mission today really is to trace how this conflict between Stephen and Mulligan evolves right here. We'll dissect the philosophical ideas Mulligan uses, almost like a shield, to deflect responsibility and, frankly, to wound Stephen. And we'll witness Stephen's suffering is palpable, physical even. It's a pivotal moment. It fundamentally shapes how you understand the relationship and the broader themes of the novel. Hopefully it gives you a shortcut to appreciating Joyce's craft and the deep currents running through Ulysses.
Okay, so we open this page, and it's almost abrupt, isn't it? We get these really vivid, almost bizarre snippets of dialogue. Shears, a scared calf's face, gilded with marmalade. I don't want to be debagged. Don't you play the giddy ox with me. Joyce just drops us, you the reader, right into this moment. Not much explanation. You can almost feel the chaos, the kind of underlying energy of the place, that image. A scared calf's face gilded with marmalade. It's particularly striking, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. It's unsettling, but also darkly funny. It's that classic Joycean blend, isn't it? Sets a peculiar tone immediately.
And then those warnings, I don't want to be debagged, and don't you play the giddy ox with me. They sound quite colloquial, a bit aggressive maybe.
Yeah, they immediately suggest a certain tension. A playful edge, perhaps, but sharp. It hints at the kind of interactions happening in the background. What's immediately clear, I think, is how Joyce just immerses us in this moment. It's playful, yes, but there's an underlying antagonism there. These fragments, they establish a boisterous atmosphere, but one where verbal sparring and maybe a lack of reverence are key. The suddenness pulls you right in, doesn't it? Into this ongoing, unexplained event. You feel like you're eavesdropping.
Right, like we've just walked into the middle of something.
Exactly. And the phrases themselves, they hint at a kind of casual cruelty, a willingness to push boundaries, which becomes crucial as the scene develops between Stephen and Mulligan. Think of it as a little microdrama. It foreshadows the larger emotional landscape of their, strained friendship. The mention of debagged, for instance.
Yeah.
That's public humiliation, right? Stripping someone's trousers off. It suggests a dynamic of power and vulnerability, even if it's just rough jesting among young men.
It's not outright violence, but it signals something.
It signals a potential for disrespect, a lack of boundaries. And that quickly becomes characteristic of Mulligan, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
This playful menace, it sets a slightly unsettling tone. It's a prelude to deeper conflicts, and it tells you a lot about the social environment Stephen's navigating in that tower.
So it's not just random noise, this background chatter. It's deliberately crafted. Joyce is showing us the nature of the relationships, the intellectual atmosphere.
Precisely. He's preparing us for a world where verbal jabs, maybe even casual humiliations, are just part of the daily rhythm.
It sounds like the kind of environment where wit is valued, maybe over empathy sometimes.
Spot on. Win is prized, but empathy often takes a backseat to performance, to one-upmanship. And this becomes especially relevant when we consider Mulligan. He weaponizes language incredibly effectively. So these opening lines, they aren't just noise. They're a carefully chosen overture to the specific kind of conflict that's about to unfold. It's part of the fabric of this bohemian intellectual community, but one that subtly hints at its less compassionate side.
And then right amidst this verbal flurry, this chaos, Joyce shifts our focus completely. Abruptly. It's like a momentary pause. He gives us this image. Shouts from the open window, startling evening in the quadrangle. A deaf gardener, aproned, masked with Matthew Arnold's face, pushes his mower on the somber lawn, watching narrowly the dancing motes of grass halms.
It feels like such a deliberate contrast, doesn't it? This quiet, almost serene image, but it's packed with strange details.
It really is. A deaf gardener, Matthew Arnold's face. The intense focus on tiny specks of grass. It's specific, almost surreal, like a painting dropped into the narrative.
It definitely draws your attention.
And it's a profound symbolic interlude. The scholarship on this passage is quite clear. It interprets this gardener as a symbol of the limited perspective of some characters in the novel, their preoccupation with superficial details, and their inability to grasp deeper meanings or realities.
Mm-hmm.
So that forces us to ask, right? Why is Joyce sticking this seemingly mundane, almost static scene right here at such a critical point, just before the big confrontation? Okay, so let's unpack the symbolism. The deaf part seems obvious.
Yeah, it immediately suggests an inability, maybe an unwillingness to hear or engage with what's going on around him. The deeper truths, the world's events, a kind of detachment from external reality. This gardener, he's oblivious to the shouts from the open window, much like perhaps some characters are deaf to the emotional undercurrents swirling around them.
And his focus, it's so precise, but on something so tiny. Dancing motes of grass halms.
Exactly. His narrowly watching them speaks to this hyper-focus on insignificance. He's missing the larger movements, the broader landscape. He's literally missing the forest for the motes of grass in this case, caught in a kind of tunnel vision.
And then there's the Matthew Arnold's face. That's a very specific reference. Arnold, the Victorian poet and cultural critic, hugely influential. Why mask a humble gardener with his face?
It's particularly telling, isn't it? Arnold was a major voice for culture, criticizing what he saw as Philistinism, intellectual shortcomings. He championed Hellenism, beauty, intelligence, balance against Hebraism, which he linked to strict morality, dogma. So, masking a gardener, a figure of humble toil, with this distinguished intellectual's face, well, it could be Joyce taking a subtle jab at intellectual detachment. Or maybe it's a critique of a certain kind of cultural criticism that, despite his grand ideas, misses the vibrant, messy reality of life itself. Or maybe even ignores real individual suffering.
Like some intellectuals might be deaf to immediate realities lost in their theories.
Sort of, yeah. As if Joyce is suggesting that some intellectuals, maybe like Arnold for all their wisdom, can be deaf to the tangible world, preoccupied with theoretical motes rather than the actual human condition.
So the core insight here is this critique of detachment. Joyce shows us someone literally blind and deaf to the big picture. A warning, maybe, not to get lost in the details and miss life happening right in front of us.
Precisely. It encourages us, you, the listener, to question our own focus. Are we sometimes distracted by the dancing motes, missing the bigger picture? This gardener embodies that danger of intellectual or social blindness. And if we speculate a bit, think how this might reflect on characters like Mulligan. He uses philosophical arguments later to avoid emotional depth. Or even Stephen himself, who gets lost in his own thoughts, sometimes maybe struggling to connect with the immediate world. It's a subtle but powerful foreshadowing of themes of perception, engagement with reality that run right through the novel.
Okay, so amidst the external noise, the symbolic gardener, Stephen's mind flashes these three phrases, really profound, quite cryptic.
Yeah.
To ourselves, new paganism, and falsalos. These aren't just random words, are they? They feel loaded with significance, like a glimpse into his intense inner life.
Absolutely not random. It's like he's mentally trying to grasp this set of interlocking concepts, these ideas swirling around him, shaping his worldview. And the scholarship tells us these expressions are, all of them apparently associated with Mulligan and his plans for the tower, end quote. They encompass a huge range of meanings. Political, aesthetic, spiritual, sexual. They point towards this countercultural vision that is avant-garde and anti-bourgeois, a radical break from traditional Ireland.
So it's Mulligan's influence, but Stephen's processing it internally?
Exactly. This brief thought opens a crucial window into the intellectual and ideological ferment Stephen's experiencing, ideas often coming from Mulligan's more provocative influence. What's fascinating is how Joyce crams so much meaning into so few words. They form this cohesive, though complex vision, challenging the status quo, pushing against conservative forces. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it, how the novel's seemingly straightforward narrative pauses for these deep dives into a character's mind. It enriches our understanding of their motives, the intellectual currents of the time.
It's that layering Joyce does so well. Dense, almost poetic summaries of internal struggle and external ambition.
It really is a testament to his technique.
Let's start with to ourselves. Sounds simple, maybe to self-reliance. But in early 20th century Ireland, that phrase must have carried immense weight. It shouts national identity to me.
You're absolutely right. It goes far beyond a common saying. While it later became strongly linked to political independence, it sounds a lot like the English sense of Sinn Féin, we ourselves, that political slogan. The research clarifies that back then, in the 1890s, early 1900s, it was connected more broadly with the Irish literary revival, not simply with politics.
Ah, okay, so wider than just politics.
Yes. Figures like Arthur Griffith, who actually visited the Martello Tower, and Oliver Gogarty, the real-life Mulligan, who later worked with Griffith to organize the Sinn Féin movement, they were part of this broader cultural awakening. So the phrase has this dual nature. A call for political autonomy, yes, but also this simultaneous yearning for a distinct Irish cultural identity separate from British influence. That historical backdrop is crucial.
So independence, but also cultural self-definition. How did that actually play out? What did the literary revival do?
It was a powerful movement. Think of the plays by Yeats or Synge. They were drawing on Irish myths, folklore, rural life to articulate a unique national consciousness. The revival aimed to create new Irish literature, drama, art, reflecting this unique spirit, moving beyond the colonial shadow, rejecting British cultural dominance. So to ourselves, it really represents this multifaceted assertion of Irish identity. Cultural and intellectual sovereignty just as much as political. It encapsulates that deep yearning for self-determination and governance, sure, but also in shaping what it meant to be Irish. Independent in thought, art, spirit. And that's a sentiment Stephen, as an aspiring artist, deeply resonates with, even if his path to achieving it is very different from Mulligan's more boisterous approach.
Okay, then juxtaposed with nationalism is new paganism. That phrase immediately signals something radical, a departure, a rejection of established norms. It's not just rejecting old ways, it sounds like embracing something totally different, almost revolutionary. Our sources call it a slogan of the young artistic avant-garde of the 1890s, saying Christianity had run its course. Wow, that's a bold statement for Ireland at that time.
It absolutely is, hugely provocative, and this concept ties directly into Mulligan's worldview. It reflects his Arnoldian conviction that Irish society is too Hebraic and must be Hellenized. Just to clarify for you, the Hebraic tradition in this context means that strict morality, asceticism, religious dogma, sort of a puritanical focus on ethical code, self-denial. Hellenic, on the other hand, embraces aesthetic beauty, sensual pleasure, intellectual freedom, a fuller engagement with life, think ancient Greek culture, celebrating the human form, the intellect. So Mulligan, like Matthew Arnold before him, felt Irish society was stifled by these Hebraic constraints. It needed liberating, Hellenizing.
And it connects to Nietzsche too, right? Freedom from morality.
Yes, the sources link it to his Nietzschean belief in freedom from Christian morality and freedom to pursue selfish impulses.
Gee.
Hugely influential, God is dead, advocating for individuals to create their own values, embrace life vigorously. So this new paganism advocates for liberation from traditional religious and moral constraints, embracing a more artistic, individualistic, even hedonistic ethos. And it wasn't just theoretical. The Pagan Review of 1892, a real publication, explicitly linked it to the various forces of sexual emotion, so a direct connection to carnal freedom, rejecting Victorian prudishness.
So intellectual and artistic freedom, but also explicitly sexual liberation. That is radical for the time. What did it mean declaring Christianity obsolete in Catholic Ireland? How did that go down?
It was incredibly provocative, often met with outrage. In a society where the church held immense moral and social authority, declarations like that were seen as blasphemous, deeply threatening to the social order. And for Mulligan, this wasn't just abstract philosophy. It was a call to live differently, to embody this rejection. He lived a pretty uninhibited life himself, pushing boundaries. It sets Mulligan up not just as an intellectual, but as a provocateur, an iconoclast, someone actively trying to overturn established norms and moral codes. And for Stephen, who's grappling with his own faith crisis, his artistic identity, these ideas from Mulligan are both alluring and deeply troubling. They represent a potential path to liberation, but also a stark challenge to his Catholic upbringing, his moral compass. That tension is central for Stephen throughout the book.
Finally, omphalos, the Greek word for navel. This word seems to carry so many meanings. Sacred, mystical center of the world, but also something explicitly sexual. It feels like a really loaded word.
Oh, it is. In Mulligan's vocabulary, it represents the language of intellectual and sensual liberation. The prophetic oracle at Delphi, revered as the center of the ancient world, a spiritual life source, was famously called an omphalos. It was literally a sculpted stone, the navel of the world. And Joyce definitely knew about this multi-layered meaning. You see echoes elsewhere in the novel. Like in Circe, Mulligan's black mass happens on an eminence, the center of the earth, a clear echo of Delphi, positioning himself at the heart of this new, inverted spiritual order. Even Stephen in Proteus thinks about mystic monks meditating on their belly buttons. Will you be as gods? Gaze in your omphalos. For Stephen, it connects to a more introspective, maybe mystical path to self-knowledge. The navel is origin, spiritual center, life nexus, deeply symbolic for someone seeking meaning.
And the tower itself, the Martello Tower they're in?
Right, the scholarship highlights that too. Richard Ellman, Joyce's biographer, suggests Gogarty, the real-life Mulligan, called the tower the omphalos for two reasons. One, because it looked like a navel, that circular bulbous shape, and two, because it might become the temple of neo-paganism, a new cultural center, as important as the navel stone at Delphi. There's also another interesting possibility from the materials, that this specific tower was the first Martello tower built guarding Dublin, making it a geographical center, strategically important. So you have geographical, spiritual, physical symbolism all converging.
But then there's the more provocative layer, the sources mention. Well, something more explicit.
Absolutely. The research notes the tower and even the Delphi stone can be seen as phallic in shape. And Joyce, it seems, isn't asking us to choose between the umbilical birth, origin, and the phallic procreation, male sexuality. He seems to be merging them.
Blending the spiritual and the carnal.
Yeah. Exactly. High and low, sacred and profane. In Oxen of the Sun, later in Ulysses, we learn Mulligan explicitly links procreative connotations of navels and phalluses, omphiloi, and obelisks. His outrageous plan for a national fertilizing farm to be named Omphalos on Lambay Island, complete with an erected obelisk, a classic phallic symbol, and his audacious offer of dutiful yeoman services for the fecundation of any female of any grade of life soever. Well, that's a clear, shocking expression of this new paganism. It's a vision involving, quote, much exercise of his own phallus, in the noblest task for which our bodily organism has been framed.
Wow. That is incredibly provocative and frankly quite shocking. It sounds like a deliberate attempt to outrage, to challenge every single societal norm.
It absolutely is. And connecting this to the bigger picture, this blend of high philosophy, ancient spirituality, and just overt, unapologetic sexuality, it profoundly challenges conventional notions of culture, of morality. It really underscores Mulligan's and maybe Joyce's radical vision for a liberated, uninhibited Ireland, rooted in both intellectual and physical freedom. For you, this paints a vivid, if sometimes unsettling, picture of Mulligan, eager to break all norms, using intellectual arguments to justify his unbridled desires. It's a philosophical shield and a weapon, all rolled into one. And it sets the stage perfectly for his confrontations with Stephen, who grapples with these same ideas, but with a much more troubled conscience.
Okay, so the conversation pivots sharply here. Stephen tries to bring it back from these grand ideas to something very raw, very personal. He asks Mulligan if he remembers a specific, painful event after his mother's death. And Mulligan's immediate reply is, what? Where? I can't remember anything. I remember only ideas and sensations. Why? What happened in the name of God? Yeah. That response to such a deeply personal question, that's quite striking. What's really going on here? Is it just a convenient excuse? Or is there something deeper philosophically?
The scholarship really confirms your intuition there. Mulligan's statement, it appears to draw on 18th century empiricist philosophy, which posited sensory origins of all human knowledge. How? So he's basically using a sophisticated philosophical framework to dodge personal responsibility. It's quite the artful dodge, as the research nicely puts it.
An artful dodge. I like that.
He's implying that life is just this flurry of changing sense perceptions and the concepts we uncertainly infer from them. No firm grasp of objects or events. So in such a phenomenological storm, this constant flux of subjective impressions, how, he implies, could anyone possibly be expected to remember, let alone be held responsible for, some hurtful words? Or a friend's mother's death. It becomes this convenient philosophical excuse for his self-centered hedonism. Lets him evade emotional accountability. It's brilliant, in a way, if ethically questionable, sidesteps responsibility completely.
So he's not just forgetting, he's philosophically justifying forgetting, or rather justifying not being held accountable for what he might have said or done.
Precisely. Leaving Stephen and us wondering about his true intentions. Is it genuine philosophical belief or pure self-serving deflection? #B, the legacy of John Locke and skepticism.
And our sources point specifically to John Locke's influence here. Locke, a huge figure in philosophy, father of liberalism, profoundly shaped the Enlightenment. How does his thinking apply to Mulligan's particular brand of avoidance?
Right. Locke is key. His work laid the foundation for so much modern empiricism. He argued that our knowledge of external things comes only from sensation. He explored this in his essay concerning human understanding, Book 4, Chapter 11, Knowledge of the Existence of Other Things. He put it very clearly. We can know of the existence of other things only by sensation. And crucially, no idea you have in your mind has any necessary connection with any real existence. He even said, and I'm quoting roughly here, that just having an idea of something in your mind doesn't prove it exists, any more than a picture of a man proves he's real or a dream makes true history.
Okay, so Locke's saying our sensations give us ideas, but those ideas aren't necessarily perfect copies of reality, and they don't prove anything outside our own perception.
Exactly. Now, Locke himself wasn't a total skeptic. He believed we could be certain of our own existence, of God's, and gain useful knowledge of the external world. But he laid the groundwork by stating that every idea we have about things outside us, including other human beings, is drawn from sensations. And these sensations might correspond to something actual, but they do not do so necessarily or exactly.
So there's a gap between sensation and reality.
A potential gap. And some 18th century philosophers, building on Locke, took this further. They drew the conclusion that reliable understanding of the external world is impossible, since one knows only one's remembered ideas of subjective sensations. This extreme subjective skepticism leads to what's called the effacement of other subjects, meaning other people's experiences, their feelings, even their existence can become unknowable or just irrelevant to the individual. And Mulligan, he gleefully weaponizes this theory, conveniently leaves out any moral sensations that might contradict his callousness. It's an intellectual shield, allows him to justify his lack of empathy by claiming others' pain is fundamentally unknowable, impervious to Stephen's suffering.
It's a very convenient philosophical position if you want to avoid feeling bad about hurting someone.
Extremely convenient. #tag T Berkeley and Stephen's alternative epistemology.
But Stephen engages with these same philosophical questions, doesn't he? Though his path seems wildly different from Mulligan's cynical approach. Both characters are grappling with similar ideas, but reaching very different conclusions about reality and responsibility. Stephen, the sources say, is inspired by the Irish philosopher George Berkeley. Berkeley, famous for believing perhaps no material world exists outside his own mind. That idea, to be is to be perceived.
Right. Berkeley's radical idealism is directly opposed to the materialism of most of Locke's followers. Yet, interestingly, it also stems from that same disjunction between sensations and objects that Locke introduced. It's a fascinating intellectual lineage, isn't it? How different minds take a shared starting point in completely different directions. Contrast Stephen's journey with Mulligan's. Remember when Stephen's walking on the beach in Proteus? He sees his sensory perceptions not as unreliable impressions of material things, but as colored signs.
Colored signs, what does that mean?
Signs that can be read like text to reveal an invisible spiritual order of being. He's looking for deeper, almost mystical meaning behind the sensory world, a way to connect the material to the divine or spiritual.
So while Mulligan uses philosophy to create distance, to justify detachment, Stephen uses it to seek deeper connections.
Exactly. Which raises that important question. How do both characters, using similar philosophical starting points, knowledge from sensations, arrive at such vastly different conclusions about reality and moral responsibility? One uses philosophy to evade, the other to seek deeper meaning, a spiritual order. The core insight, I think, is that Mulligan weaponizes these concepts as a shield against emotional responsibility. Stephen, grappling with similar ideas, uses them to search for something more profound. It really shows how intellectual frameworks can be tools for callousness or pathways to understanding. It's also worth noting Mulligan might not have gotten his Lockean view directly from deep study. He might have picked it up secondhand, maybe through the influence of figures like David Hartley's mechanistic concept of the human psyche, or David Hume's investigations, all shaped by Locke. This suggests maybe a less direct, perhaps less nuanced understanding on Mulligan's part, which he then just repurposes for his own self-serving arguments. Makes his philosophical stance seem more like a superficial performance than a deeply held conviction.
Okay, so after Mulligan's philosophical deflection, Stephen forces the issue. He recounts this memory with such painful precision. He says, "Do you remember the first day I went to your house after my mother's death?" He sets the scene. Mulligan making tea, his mother a visitor, the direct question, and then those devastating words. "Oh, it's only Dedalus whose mother is beastly dead." Wow, that's just a profound moment of raw emotional exposure. You can almost feel the weight of that memory for Stephen, how it's clearly haunted him, how deep it cuts.
And Mulligan's reaction is incredibly telling, isn't it? The text describes a flush which made him seem younger and more engaging rose to Buck Mulligan's cheek.
Yep.
But it's explicitly described not as remorse. It's embarrassment at having committed a social impropriety.
Embarrassment, not guilt or sadness.
Embarrassment. And his immediate, almost defensive reaction, did I say that? Well, what harm is that? And then him shaking his constraint from him nervously. It clearly shows he knows he crossed a line, but he utterly fails to grasp the depth of the wound he inflicted. He's registering a social faux pas, a breach of decorum, maybe? But not the profound emotional devastation his words caused.
He thinks Stephen's angry about the blunt language, the phrase beastly dead, not the utter lack of empathy.
Exactly. He assumes Stephen's anger is about hearing his mother described that way. Crude, yes, but in Mulligan's free-thinking view, just honest. He supposes enlightened men shouldn't be disturbed by frank talk about the brutal fact of death. He frames it as Stephen being overly sensitive to a harsh truth, rather than acknowledging the callousness of his delivery, the context of profound grief. It just highlights his profound lack of empathy. He's focused on the external social norm, the intellectual performance of free thinking, not the internal pain of his friend. This confrontation is really at the heart of their strained relationship, exposes Mulligan's superficiality, his inability or unwillingness to connect with genuine human suffering. He gets the social misstep, but is oblivious to the emotional devastation. #, B. Mulligan's brutal dissection of death. Lens 204-207.
And then Mulligan goes on the offensive. He doubles down on the insensitivity, launches into this shocking dismissal of death itself, he says. And what is death? Your mother's or yours or my own. You saw only your mother die. I see them pop off every day in the Mater and Richmond and cut up into tripes in the dissecting room. It's a beastly thing and nothing else. It simply doesn't matter.
That is incredibly harsh.
Right.
Reducing death and grief to just biology. It feels designed to invalidate Stephen's feelings, to wound him even more.
Oh, it's absolutely strategic. It's not just a callous statement. It's a rhetorical move to invalidate Stephen's grief, strip it of personal significance. Mulligan, the medical student, uses his experience, his knowledge from the Mater and Richmond hospitals. He adopts that free-thinking stance again, where blunt, brutal honesty about death is presented as intellectually superior to, sentimental mourning. He's weaponizing a scientific clinical perspective to rationalize away empathy, turning his professional observations into a tool for control, for emotional detachment. Like he's performing emotional surgery on Stephen's feelings, trying to cut out the pain with cold facts.
That's a great way to put it. Trying to prove his own intellectualized perspective is superior.
How does this clinical, almost dehumanizing description actually wound Stephen further? It must feel incredibly isolating.
Deeply isolating. It denies the sanctity of individual loss, reduces this profound human experience to mere biological process, stripping it of any spiritual, personal, or emotional significance. For Stephen, carrying the weight of his mother's death, his own guilt about her last wish, this is a direct assault on his deepest vulnerabilities. It's a deliberate attempt to intellectualize away grief, an experience that is inherently personal, deeply emotional. And it raises that question for you, doesn't it? Is Mulligan truly unafraid of death? Or is this a defense mechanism, that philosophical shield again, to avoid confronting his own mortality, his own vulnerability? He might be using this brutal bluntness to maintain his own detachment, projecting his anxieties onto Stephen by dismissing all grief as irrational. #D. The unforgivable Jesuit strain in the mother's last wish. Lines 207-215.
Mulligan then doubles down again. He turns the attack directly onto Stephen in his mother's final moments, which is just truly vicious. He says, you wouldn't kneel down to pray for your mother on her deathbed when she asked you. Why? Because you have the cursed Jesuit strain in you, only it's injected the wrong way. Then he mocks her dying state. Her cerebral lobes are not functioning. She calls the doctor Sir Peter Teasel and picks buttercups off the quilt. Humor her till it's over. And he finishes by blaming Stephen for sulking with me because I don't whinge like some hired mute from Lalouette's. It's just an onslaught. Accusations, mockery, blame, all aimed at Stephen's most vulnerable point.
It's a devastating personal assault. It crosses a line even Mulligan rarely seems to breach. He uses Stephen's profound internal conflict about faith, about his mother's last wish against him. Stephen's refusal to kneel, stemming from his own spiritual crisis, his rejection of Catholicism, that's a source of immense guilt for him. Mulligan twists this complex struggle. He portrays it not as a search for truth, but as a cursed Jesuit strain gone awry. It's a subtle but biting insult, suggesting Stephen is inherently flawed, even perverse in his relationship with religion. And by mocking his mother's delirium, dismissing her last wish, Mulligan crosses a clear ethical line, reveals this deeply ingrained insensitivity, this willingness to inflict maximum pain just for intellectual advantage.
And he throws in that literary allusion, Sir Peter Teasel. That sounds specific.
It is. Sir Peter Teasel is from Sheridan's play, School for Scandal. He's known for his naivete, being easily duped by gossip and appearances. So Mulligan uses this name, maybe ironically, to suggest Stephen's mother's words were just meaningless ramblings from a confused mind, devoid of significance, further trivializing her final moments. Or maybe it's even a veiled dig at Stephen's own perceived naivete, which is pretty ironic given Mulligan's own performance of philosophical detachment. This isn't just disrespect for the dead, it's intellectualized cruelty, designed to inflict maximum pain by leveraging Stephen's deepest guilt. And then he shifts the blame entirely. Portrays Stephen as oversensitive, like a hired mute from Lalowetz being a well-known Dublin undertaker, implying Stephen's grief is just a performance, a theatrical display for hire. It's a cruel minimization of Stephen's very real, legitimate pain, a tactic to make Stephen feel ashamed of his own deeply human reaction.
You know, it's often said that Stephen Dedalus is this creature of intellect, detached, cerebral. Even Joyce's own early notes for Ulysses apparently suggested that Telemachus does not yet bear a body in these first episodes, implying a kind of disembodiment. But this scene, it vividly contradicts that idea, doesn't it? It shows such a physical response to pain. He isn't just mentally processing these insults, he's experiencing them. Profoundly, bodily, our sources quote the lines. Sea and headland now grew dim, pulses were beating in his eyes, veiling their sight, and he felt the fever of his cheeks. This isn't abstract suffering, it's a full-body experience, a visceral reaction to intense emotional trauma.
Yes, what's truly fascinating here is how Joyce vividly portrays Stephen's corporeal passion. It's not abstract intellectual pain, it's a profound physiological response. The research points out, one thinks of the idiom seeing red and the physiology that it evokes. Adrenaline-charged blood rushing to the head, suffusing the cheeks, dimming the eyes. This direct, visceral description of Stephen's reaction is absolutely crucial. It undeniably shows a man who suffers a body to a really poignant degree, directly challenges that notion that he lacks simple creaturely feeling. His body is responding profoundly to the emotional trauma. It makes his grief intensely real, relatable for us, and it provides such a stark contrast to Mulligan's intellectualized, detached view of suffering.
So Joyce is deliberately showing us Stephen isn't just a mind. He's a deeply feeling, physical being, despite the intellectual focus often put on him.
Absolutely. This choice, depicting Stephen's physical suffering, adds this powerful layer of humanity, of vulnerability, to a character often seen as purely cerebral, just an intellectual. It reminds us that intellectual struggles, profound emotional pain. They're often deeply intertwined with bodily experience. Our minds, our emotions aren't separate from our physical selves. It grounds Stephen in this tangible reality of pain that Mulligan, ironically, tries to abstract away. For you, this really underscores the authenticity of Stephen's suffering, makes his plight immediate, empathetic, shows him as complex, not just a symbol of intellectual pursuits. His physical response is proof of the depth of the wound Mulligan inflicted.
And in stark contrast to Stephen's palpable physical anguish, Mulligan's earlier flush, that was just superficial embarrassment at having committed a social impropriety. He truly doesn't seem to grasp the depth of Stephen's pain, famously calling him, an impossible person, accusing him of sulking because I don't whinge like some hired mute from Lalowetz. He just completely dismisses Stephen's legitimate, profound reaction.
The scholarship here is explicit, and it offers a really critical insight. Mulligan fails to understand why the friend would feel hurt, and then compounds the injury by going on the offensive and accusing the friend of having murdered his mother. This isn't a minor oversight. The analysis suggests that he, not Stephen, is the one who has trouble accessing bodily feeling. For all his outgoing bonhomie, he lacks heart.
He lacks heart. That's quite a statement.
It unpacks the profound difference between them. Grief is described as a state of intense narcissistic self-absorption, where the most intolerable slight is to have one's feelings dismissed as negligible. Mulligan's actions perfectly embody that dismissal. He views Stephen's natural human grief as an absurd weakness, further cementing his own emotional detachment, demonstrating this profound lack of empathy.
So Mulligan's performance of free thinking, his intellectual posturing, it actually masks a deep emotional deficiency, almost a blindness to genuine human feeling.
Exactly. He's putting on this show of intellectual superiority, but it comes at the cost of authentic connection. He can't, or perhaps won't, acknowledge Stephen's pain as legitimate. And that motif of corporeal feeling, it's a recurring thread for Stephen throughout the novel, consistently differentiates him from Mulligan. Like later in the Aeolus episode, when Stephen, his blood wooed by grace of language and gesture, blushed. This consistent portrayal emphasizes Stephen's authentic responsiveness to the world, intellectual and emotional, differentiates him sharply from Mulligan's performative, callous exterior. It's a key distinction Joyce meticulously builds for us, you, the reader, to observe. demonstrating that for all his intellectual brilliance, Mulligan is emotionally stunted in a way Stephen is not. #Hag outro.
Wow. What a profound and, yeah, often uncomfortable deep dive into just one page, page 7 of Ulysses. We've navigated this landscape of cutting insults, philosophical defenses, nationalist aspirations, and that raw physical manifestation of grief. It's just such a powerful illustration of how Joyce packs layers upon layers of meaning into every single line, makes you, the reader, work for it, but rewards you with such rich understanding of character, philosophy, emotion.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this scene isn't just some personal spat, is it? It's truly a foundational moment. It lays bare the contrasting worldviews of Stephen and Mulligan. It forces you, to question how we perceive reality, how we understand death, and critically, how we navigate empathy, how we respond to each other's suffering. It's a powerful reminder, really. Beneath all the intellectual sparring, the philosophical shields, deeply human emotions are always at play, shaping our experiences, our relationships in profound, often painful ways.
So what really stands out to you from this page? How do you grapple with Mulligan's casual cruelty versus Stephen's undeniable physical pain? And what kind of philosophical shields do you see people, or maybe even yourself, using to avoid uncomfortable truths or feelings in your own life?
Consider the implications, maybe for today, of a society that increasingly values intellectual detachment, or maybe that performative free thinking over genuine emotional connection. What are the dangers when an artful dodge becomes a dominant mode of interaction, particularly when we're confronted with the rawest aspects of human experience, like grief and death? What is lost when we philosophize away our shared humanity?